Hello, my name is Grant Moore, and I'm the CEO of SPC Nickel. And today I'd like to go through an introduction to our Muskox project. This is going to be the first of a series of short presentations that get into the geology of the project, why we acquired it, and the mineralization, and also why we think it is one of the best early staged polymetallic greenfields projects out there right now. Typical disclaimer statement, make sure you do your own research. So SPC's portfolio of projects is really dominated by two main assets: the Lockerbie East property in the world-class Sudbury mining camp, where we have a large open pittable resource and a higher grade polymetallic deposit at depth that's open with some excellent geophysical conductors. And this is a project that we are actively advancing right now. But the focus of this discussion will be more on our Muskox project. And we view this as a tier one polymetallic copper nickel precious metal opportunity, greenfields opportunity in northern Canada in Nunavut. This is a project that we think is one of the best greenfields opportunities out there. It has size, scale, it has grade, and the potential is just enormous. So, this is a really key asset for the company and has huge upside potential, and is something that will be the focus of our exploration activities over the next coming years. And what is really important about these deposits, as our name would say, we are a nickel company, but all of these assets that we have are polymetallic. And I think that's a key important fact to make, is it's just not a single commodity. And in most cases, the copper is more prevalent than nickel. And that, I think, is really important for these assets moving forward. And if you look around the world at some of the big magmatic sulfide deposits that are out there, they're all polymetallic. The big examples are Norilsk, Talnak in Russia, the Sudbury Basin in Voisey's Bay in Newfoundland and Labrador. And these are the ones that we use as examples. And why do you want to explore for these deposits? And it's really because they are multi-commodity. So you have kind of a built-in hedge across commodity cycles. So when nickel is down, copper is up, gold's up, platinum, palladium. In what we're looking for are basically all the strategic metals that are hot right now: nickel, copper, cobalt. These are all contained within one deposit, which makes them very, very interesting and very exciting and to find. And probably most important about these deposits is that they are high value deposits. Regardless of the commodities, magmatic sulfide deposits are some of the most valuable deposits on the planet, because you have at least 5 to 6 payable metals. Often, as an example, as in Sudbury, the credits, byproduct credits, actually pay for the cost of the main core production costs, being for nickel and copper. So these are high NSR value deposits, which as prices fluctuate, that's what you want to be finding in a deposit, is to have a high NSR value. And these are big assets. They're not formed in all over the place. They're restricted to very specific geological environments. But when they are found, they're usually large assets in the hundreds of millions to sometimes billions of tons. And they have very long lived mining histories. And Sudbury is a good example, has been mined for over 150 years. And one common characteristic about these sorts of deposits is they do form in clusters. So they're not a one and done sort of deposit. You have the ability to find multiple satellite deposits after that initial discovery. New deposits are being discovered every couple of years in Sudbury. And so that just shows the longevity and the value that these sorts of big deposits can have. And just to kind of expand on that, what we looked at was to take the Norilsk deposit and kind of compare it to some of the other world's largest copper deposits. These are the ones we took a suite of deposits that are greater than 1 billion tons of reserves and resources. And if you looked on rankings, you'd probably see that Norilsk was considered to be, or is considered to be, the largest kind of nickel sulfide resource out there. And it usually sits around fifth or sixth when it comes to copper resources. And most of these big, large copper deposits are also polymetallic. They contain things like gold, silver, molybdenum, zinc. So if you take all those metals and look at these on an even playing field and say what is their copper equivalence grade and what is the contained copper equivalence within these deposits, you can fairly quickly see that Norilsk is, basically the largest and most valuable deposit on the planet, and much larger and much more valuable than a lot of the big copper porphyries and sediment-hosted copper deposits that we know of. These are the trillion sort of ton deposits that are generational sorts of assets. And, these are not deposits that form everywhere, and they don't form very often, and they're really difficult to find. But if a company is fortunate enough to find one, I mean, it's a game-changing asset. So, the challenges that we were faced is, well, where can you look for these sorts of deposits? And that was something that we took the Norilsk model and basically reviewed it and said that Norilsk is part and related to what's called a large igneous province, or it's related to what's called the Siberian Traps, where you have a large outpouring of magma on the surface, and Norilsk represented the kind of the feeder system for that large igneous events. So we started to look around in areas that hadn't been looked at in the past as much for a similar sort of geological environment. You can't be focused on very small details. You have to look quite large at the big picture. And that's what's led us to Nunavut and to the Muskox. We think that we've got all of the characteristics that you want to see in a big nickel camp setting are right here in Nunavut around the Muskox Project. So we think this has got an excellent opportunity for the discovery of a tier 1 polymetallic copper nickel PGM deposit or deposits. And what we really like about it is you've got crustal scale structures. You're on the edge of the slave craton, so you have a thin crust to start with. Then you've got the emplacement of what's called the Mackenzie mantle plume, or the Mackenzie large igneous event, which basically caused uplift and rifting of these of the country rock. So you have material coming from the mantle up into the crust and erupting on surface. The Muskox intrusion is directly related to a large igneous province like we see in Norilsk. And this, as I mentioned, is called the Mackenzie Large Igneous Province. So we have the Muskox intrusion, which represented the feeder system to the overlying copper mine flood basalts, which erupted on surface. So that is what you are looking for, a dynamic open system where metal-rich magmas from the mantle are coming up through the crust, interacting with the crust, and then erupting on surface. Very similar to what we see at Norilsk. Important for magmatic sulfide deposits are sulfur sources. So these, the Muskox intrusion has been emplaced into oceanic sediments, which are sulfur bearing. So there's lots of sulfur bearing sediments around. As I mentioned, you have this really dynamic system where you have a feeder dike to the south or underneath this big, large intrusion, which then fed higher up into the flood basalt. So you have a dynamic open system where you have lots of magma moving through. You have lots of evidence of that with breccias, metamorphism of the country rock, and that's all good signs that you want to see for these sorts of systems. And all of those characteristics are great, but if you don't have sulfide mineralization forming, then it's all for nothing. But that is another great example in the Muskox. Is we have high-grade copper, nickel, PG-rich massive sulfide from one end of the intrusion to the other. This is over 125 kilometers of strike length that SPC controls. You can find high-grade massive sulfide from one end to the other. and historic drill intervals that are of the grade that you need to develop an asset up in this area of Canada. So all the check marks that you want to see for a tier 1 sort of asset. And, you know, there's even a bigger picture there. This whole area is starting to emerge as a new critical metals district. We're seeing a lot of activity in the region. So this is the western part of Nunavut, called the Kitikmeot. And there's a lot of activity from junior companies for critical metals, particularly copper and uranium. So, you know, this is just a map of the land tenure right now, and the Muskox intrusion is in the blue. All the areas to the north and to the east are new companies exploring for copper mineralization, copper-silver mineralization, basically within sediment-hosted copper. Sediment-hosted copper is the style, and these deposits are basically related to the large Mackenzie event. So it's a very connected dynamic system. And then we see a lot of uranium exploration to the west as well. So this is kind of a new emerging area. I mean, SPC was able to get in here at first movers, and we're able to get in early and acquire the ground that we wanted it through staking and optioning. So we think we've got a great world-class asset in what is turning out to be a new emerging critical metals district. So that'll be the first video, and I hope to have subsequent videos coming out that get more into the geology of the intrusion, the mineralization, the styles of mineralization, and the work that we've done in the past to kind of hopefully sell you on the idea that this is a world-class asset. Thanks.